outrageously well educated and versed in things. And we're
Okay.
live. It is Thursday, the 16th day of October. I will leave it to John Hawkinson to tell you whether that is or is not the Ides of October. It is the year of our Lord 2025, and it is 8 o'clock a.m. And I forgot 2 days ago to wish you all a happy Shmini Atzeret, which is perhaps the strangest of the Jewish holidays because I think it is a holiday that literally nobody knows what it commemorates. It's just there, and but it is important to observe it and to give it its due. It is 8:01 a.m. The estimable Holly Berkley Fletcher, still bedridden, is here with us because she was so excited to meet our guest, the estimable Mike Feinberg, who is, I believe, the only current or former employee of the FBI who is capable of having the conversation that we are going to have with Laura today. Was just peppering me with questions by text. Is she a West Coast Straussian or an East Coast Straussian?
Oh
Can
dear.
I ask her about the Claremont Institute, or is that too much of a tangent? So we are rearing to fucking go right here. Look, but before we do, I have a very brief monologue, and I know what is on your minds, people. You are wondering why my tagline still says struggling with lust. And I want to tell you that the answer is that the struggle never ends. I was on Instagram and Facebook yesterday, and the algorithm is super confused right now because number one, it fed me pictures of Laura at Politics and Prose with her book. It fed me unboxing photos of Laura with her book. And it also fed me the most extremely inappropriate influencer videos I have yet seen. I'm not even going to describe what they describe. And it fed me more videos from people who probably went to high school with Holly, um, which are designed for people who are struggling with lust, and they are there to, you know, to grab, like, because they're, attractive women who, if you're struggling with lust, you're going to click on their videos, and then they tell you about Jesus and how, if you're struggling with lust, they're there to
You've been
help.
hanging out with me too much, Ben.
I have been hanging out with
This is,
Holly.
this is basically an evangelical Rickroll.
It is basically evangelical catfishing.
You must have clicked on something one time.
No, I know
No,
exactly
he just
what it
knows
is.
me.
The history is I both hang out with Holly, and
I don't know you, Holly. I have to learn more.
and
I have a
hang-
book too. I'll send you
Okay.
my book.
Okay.
and I hang out with a whole bunch of young Ukrainian women.
Oh,
And if you
my
hang out with
God.
young Ukrainian women, the algorithm draws one conclusion about you, which is that you are a sick motherfucker.
Sick motherfucker.
And you really want to buy a young woman. And
Oh
it's
my
a little bit
God.
confused about what ethnicity of young women I'm currently trying to buy, because I have not actually purchased any of the Ukrainian or Russian women that it has tried to sell me, but it is convinced. And so you get all the people, all the influencers, in addition to stuff about Laura's book, and you get all the influencers who are trying to appeal to pervy middle-aged guys. And I just want to say,
Many of whom are evangelical and probably buy women off the internet.
look, I report, you decide. I am not ashamed of my algorithmic. I think too many people are ashamed of their algorithmic feeds
Mine
because they.
still insists I need to dress according to my style archetype, but we covered that.
I
I-
clicked
months
once
back.
on a strange like body thing that popped up, and then
That's
for like
it.
weeks and weeks, it was just like the most bizarre things, and I had to actively I didn't want to see. I didn't want that, so I tried to change it.
Also, the ones, my favorite ones, which I share every single one with our co-host Eve Gamon, are the ones about how you know if young women are trying to seduce you, and it is a crazy stream. I mean, people must be watching them, and um, and so I sort of feel like because people are a little bit, and by the way, I have this theory that I can't test, which is that the range of shit that gets fed to men is actually broader than the range of shit that gets fed to women, because women, it's like, oh, you're female, you want to lose weight. Oh, you're female, you want makeup products. But men, it's like the algorithm, it's like you're a creep, but there are so many ways to be a creep. And the diversity of ways to
There
assume.
are a lot of makeup products and weight loss things as well. Although now it's all Ozempic all the time.
Yeah. So I am now on an Ozempic-like product, not because I'm trying to lose weight, but because I'm actually diabetic. And diabetes, these drugs are actually a class of drugs for diabetes.
That's how it started.
Once it knows that you are on any kind of a GLP-1, that really affects your algorithmic feed. So now it knows I'm a creep. It knows I want to buy a young Ukrainian woman, although it sometimes thinks it must be a Japanese woman because I don't actually buy the young Ukrainian women. It knows that I hang out with ex-evangelicals, and so it is making assumptions about me, and I love that, and I just want to share it with everybody because I think we're all a little bit too ashamed about the judgments that the algorithm makes about us, because it's like, oh, I don't want people to think that the algorithm would think I'm a creep. Guys, the algorithm is sure I'm a creep. It's just a question. It's just working on what type of creep I am.
Maybe it knows something we don't.
Yeah,
so
I mean, we're all thinking about it. Let's go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say, like, my algorithmic discoveries are even weirder, I think, than
Because
yours.
they're new.
Well, they're new. I had no online presence whatsoever up until about 6 months ago. And my wife and I don't think the audience knows this, my wife is a member of the Protestant clergy. And we combined all of our shopping accounts. And, like, Amazon has no idea what to do with somebody who pre-orders limited edition 4K DVDs of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and somebody who is slowly collecting the complete works of Bonhoeffer. They think we're one person, and like the recommendations get pretty fucking weird.
Yeah, so I have a similar thing. My wife and I share an Amazon account, and it definitely raises multiple personality disorder confusion in the algorithm, though not as extreme as somebody with your Halloween decorations and your wife's reading proclivities, all of which is a long-winded way of saying, and perhaps a TMI kind of way of saying, that the sun is shining. The birds are chirping. The motherfuckers may keep motherfucking. But, folks, it's going to be a great freaking day. And, Mr. Cactus?
Oh, sorry, wrong one, wrong button.
Wrong button.
Watching Dog Shirt TV, a forking revolution in morning television.
But wait, it is someone's birthday.
Yeah, it is somebody's birthday. The Cactus got it right.
Now I can't get the happy birthday song.
Happy birthday, Mike Feinberg.
Oh, wow.
Sorry.
Happy
It's out of
birthday,
control.
Mike.
Thank you. Can I give a quick shout out?
Wait,
as a
you
result
gotta
of my-
let me finish you're watching Dog Shirt. You are
This
watching
is
Dog
out of
Shirt
control.
TV, and it is a freaking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that, and there are many of them, is that sometimes Mike Feinberg doesn't let me get through the introduction and breaks in and
And I do that too all the time.
asserts his co-host prerogative of just breaking in and saying, may I, and I have to cut him off. And now I can turn things over to him for whatever shout out he's going to do.
This is quick. I just need to give a shout out to my wife, who surprised me this morning with not the most expensive, not the most luxurious, but easily the most thoughtful, given my personality, birthday gift I've ever received, which is this. You can't really see it. It is a clock, but instead of displaying numbers or anything like that, every minute it gives you a different one of 10,000 literary quotes about time that references the time it currently is.
Whoa.
Wow.
That is kind of awesome.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it.
And another one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that every now and then, and it doesn't happen very often, somebody gets in touch with me and asks for a meeting. And I, as you may know, I have a rule that everybody gets one meeting, and unless they're trying to sell me something. Everybody gets one meeting, but they only get one, and they have to justify the second meeting. And I go to coffee with a said person, and I'm saying this doesn't happen very often. And we sit down to discuss a book project that she has in process, and I am completely blown away by the discussion. And I end up super excited about the book, friends with the person, and by the way, blurbed the book, and invite the person to do a series of lectures on lawfare, which will be happening relatively shortly, and spend a lot of time thinking about the book. As I say, it's one of the revolutionary features of the show. It doesn't happen very often, but and so I invite said person to discuss the book on the show. And of course, I am talking about Laura Field, whose name is incomplete on her screen, but there I have completed it. And the book, which is now exists in physical form, is Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. And it is, is it out yet? Or is it?
Well, it's in stores, but it's not released until November 4th. It's weird.
It is not available for order.
Those of you who don't know, all book release dates are Tuesdays for reasons that nobody understands, and I've never gotten a.
Is that true?
Yeah, all book look it up. November 4th will be a Tuesday.
Okay.
Laura, welcome to Dog Shirt TV.
Thank you, Ben. I'm very pleased to be here, and you've been such a big champion, and I'm so grateful. So thank you.
Really, I would tell you that our introductions are not usually that weird and raucous, except that they are. And that's one of the things about doing a show that involves no prep of any kind.
I feel very comfortable. It's very welcoming, so thank you.
Yeah, I can tell you, you will not have a weirder introduction than that. No other podcast or host you're going to talk to is going to talk about how the algorithm thinks he's a creep first. Laura, get us started by giving us a little bit of an overview of what the book is about and what it covers.
Sure. So the book is it's an introduction and an overview of what I call the MAGA New Right. So the title is Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. And it's about the radicalization of the GOP, essentially, but from the view from the top. So the elite echelons, the intellectuals who first started defending Trump in 2016 and then sort of grew a movement around some of those ideas. And so it chronicles sort of 2016 to 2024. There's kind of a hard stop at the 2024 election, or I get a little bit further than that, but it's chronological, sort of, and thematic, moves through the different people. I profile the different characters. I try to articulate their ideas and give them, a fair shake. And though I'm very critical, and talk about the key moments where they kind of came together at the different conferences. So I dissect the movement, basically. It's kind of a bestiary, somebody called it, of the different people. But I try, I tried to do a bunch of different things in the book. I'm trying to expose the ideas, provide some clarity, because these people have been very vocal. There's a huge public record of what they believe. A lot of it's very extreme. I think they're driving some of the worst things that are happening right now. They're justifying it. They're driving it. They're not the only important thing about MAGA and Trump, but the book tries to really give a sort of full-throated articulation of all this and display of these different characters. And I can go through the different clusters and groups. It's kind of a clustered network, but it's doing that. And it's got deeper things going on too. I mean, I'm a political theorist, so there's other thematics woven in there. And I'm trying to,
yeah. So let's start before we do the survey of the sort of bestiary quality of it. And I want to say that's actually doing it a little bit of an injustice, because it makes it sound like you're sort of holding them up to ridicule. And each of these chapters is actually a pretty deep and pretty serious engagement with their ideas, some of which you're more respectful of than some of which you engage with in a very respectful way. But before we do that, let's expand a little bit on the I'm a political theorist. You sort of come from the belly of the beast, in that you trained in the middle of one of the movements that features rather prominently in the book. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got wrapped up with this crowd of peculiar misfits.
Sure. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, Ben, just because I studied.
Don't worry, I'll overstate it for you.
Yeah, you can overstate it and then I'll correct you. But so I studied political philosophy with a bunch of conservatives. So I think it's fair to call them conservatives. And it was certainly sort of in the middle of the Straussian intellectual world. And that's an important kind of dimension of what I talk about. But the group I come from, they would be pretty offended if I called them the belly of the beast, because the specific people I worked with are not Trumpists.
Of the beast.
Huh?
The appendix of
the appendix, yeah, something like that.
I don't mean the belly of the Trumpist beast,
no,
but I do mean they are West Coast Straussians.
Well, my people were not West Coast; they were East Coast Straussians.
Okay.
And so we could talk for hours about that, and I don't mind, but they're different. They're a different style of Straussian, and they have different pathologies. And I'd have to write a different book about some of that. But this book, I do talk about Strauss and Straussianism because it is important. And I applied for grad school at Claremont McKenna College, which is the belly of the intellectual West Coast Straussian beast. So, I could have gone there, and I didn't want to, because even that was 20 years ago or more. And I knew that was not my thing, because it's always been pretty sort of bizarro political in a way that I didn't like. So anyway, yeah, so I come from the Straussian world. I come from from Edmonton, Alberta. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Alberta, and was sort of on a complicated path. I wanted to be a medical doctor in the third world, kind of save the world type person, but I also loved political science. And so I was doing all the requirements for a political science degree and, pre-med. And then I had to take a required course in political theory, which was in my third year of college. I didn't want to do it. but it was a requirement, and I had a friend who had taken the course, and we were always arguing about. Anyway, I'll cut to the chase. Anyway, the guy who taught the course was this incredible professor, Straussian professor, sort of autodidact, who was just an incredible teacher. And he, it was Plato, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, and I totally fell hard for it. I mean, it was just like mind-blowing lectures, and I joke in the book about being red pilled by Plato, and there was something to that, because this guy just was a wonderful lecturer and teacher who really made you take it all seriously. And it was something that I loved school, like I loved my courses before this, but he just it was this eye-opening world onto politics that started in like 500 BCE, right? So it was like this very rich experience. So anyway, I fell hard for it, changed my major, dropped out of my chemistry classes, and just went for it. So I did my undergraduate, I did an honors degree, wrote on Plato. I did a master's degree there, wrote on Plato. And then I went to Texas for grad school and studied with these other Straussians, and, continued political philosophy.
So, very briefly for those, because it's kind of necessary for a lot of the rest of the conversation. What is a Straussian, and who is Leo Strauss?
So Leo Strauss was a German emigre scholar who fled the Nazis in the interwar period and came to the United States eventually. And he was a wonderful classicist and philosopher who he's known for the rediscovery of what is called the esoteric tradition in political philosophy, and so had this very different way of reading these ancient texts, conceiving them, I think quite rightly, though there's a lot of different ways to understand this, as sort of these multi-layered, that's perfect, the multi-layered works of political strategy, and
with a lot of hidden meaning.
You
have to draw out like you're a new critic, and it's a Shakespearean text.
It's a Shakespearean text. It's fine-tuned for different audiences, and a lot of it has to do with the radical ideas that it contains that you don't want to share openly because they're dangerous and they can get you killed, like Socrates was killed, that kind of thing. So there's a lot to it. I'm not a apostate from Straussianism per se, but so he sort of built the school of thought and has all these teachers, and it's kind of a cult-like thing, but he's got a lot of famous students. Alan Bloom was probably the most famous. Harry Jaffa is the one that matters for the story now and the story I tell in the book, because he's the leader of the West Coast Straussians who inspired the creation of the Claremont Institute, which probably the audience has all heard of.
So, remind me someday to tell you, or ask Bill Galston to tell you about the one time he went to office hours with Leo Strauss when he was a young graduate.
He's told me that story, but I can't. I have a terrible memory.
Yeah, so
he's got a lot of good stories.
Yeah, but that one is spectacular, and I use it all the time when people ask me. Not that I compare myself to Leo Strauss, but the story is that Bill spends the whole semester, 1968, Strauss is, at the end of his career. Bill is a young, promising political theory graduate student, spends the whole semester getting up the courage to go to Strauss's office hours, goes in, asks him his question, and Strauss presents several well thought out paragraphs of an answer, after which Bill says there was really just nothing left to say because the answer was so complete. And so Bill had to sort of figure out how to extricate himself because there was no,
follow-up.
It was done. So he said, well, I suppose I should leave and let you get ready for class. And Strauss responds, it would be a bit late for that. And so whenever now somebody asks me, why do you why do you speak without notes, or why do you do you need time to, get ready for a presentation? I always try to respond, it would be a bit late for that. So that's my impersonation of Leo Strauss through Bill Galston. All right, let's get to the forget the broader Straussian movement. Who are the characters that you cover in this book? And let's start with Harry Jaffa and the Claremont Institute.
Okay. So Harry Jaffa was this early student of Strauss's who studied. Strauss was mostly focused on ancient books when he did his weird esoteric readings of them. Jaffa took those insights and that sort of mode of engagement and applied it to the American tradition, and especially focusing on Abraham Lincoln. And so his first one was on like Aquinas, I think, or Aristotle. But he wrote about the Lincoln Douglas debates. And I don't know how long those debates run, maybe if you print out the whole series, but he wrote a book called The Crisis of the House Divided that really took those debates seriously as like this philosophic manuscript and political, sort of this high point of political and philosophical debate, which they are. I mean, it's a really wonderful book, and he treats it very seriously, sort of getting to the core of the debates there, and how they contain this sort of seed of these big philosophical questions, right? About majoritarianism versus sort of principle, and he elevates Lincoln in this book, and historians loved this book because it sort of changed the discussion of Lincoln and got at the philosophical sort of decency of Lincoln and the kind of incredible perceptiveness he had, and the hard line moral perceptivity that is there in Lincoln. So he does this wonderful book, and that it's just really forceful in drawing out the principles that Lincoln was working with. But if you read the Lincoln Douglas debates, you'll see that, right? It's not like it was totally revelatory. And it's a pretty weird Straussian book too. I don't know if anyone here has read it. But it's kind of wonderful. So Jaffa writes this big book on Lincoln, but that's partly what he's known for politically. And he wrote this famous line in Barry Goldwater's speech about extremism in the service of liberty is no vice, and moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. Something like that. And so he had these big moments early on in his career. He got a job at the Claremont Men's College, it was then called. Now it's Claremont McKenna College, and he had students there who then started the Claremont Institute, sort of inspired by especially the Lincoln stuff, just his attention that he paid to the founders and the Declaration of Independence and all of that. So the Claremont Institute, the mission is to restore the principles of the American founding. And over the course of a few generations, I mean, Jaffa wasn't always super involved in the Claremont Institute, but he was always there, but he wasn't he wasn't leading it necessarily. But he had these students who had this big project and made this think tank. And so they're important because that was the first place or one of the fellows at the Claremont Institute who had been a student of Jaffa's, or at least a sort of underling while Jaffa was late in life there. And I think a friend of Jaffa's, Michael Anton, was the first person to really give a full-fledged intellectual defense of Trumpism in 2016. And so he's one of the main characters in my book is Anton and some of these other people at the Claremont Institute who also published that defense. Charles Kessler runs their big journal. And so they got in on that very early, and then it became kind of someone called it a nerve center for Trumpism, and the story sort of unfolds from those moments.
Okay, I have to pull a couple threads here because this is all fascinating for me. So I'll try to do as much explanation of the question while I'm doing it for people who aren't as familiar with this milieu. But Jaffa writes 2 books about Lincoln. And I think in the second one, A New Birth of Freedom, he makes an almost tossed off line that the only way to understand the Constitution of the United States is if we look at the frame of the document as the Declaration of Independence. And he starts a movement that becomes popular in some originalist circles, that we need to treat the Declaration with as much reverence as we do the Constitution in sussing out what the American idea is all about. And from that perspective, I always thought of the West Coast Straussians as a more liberal or left-leaning strand of the intellectual right that developed, in the years after Bloom publishes The Closing of the American Mind. And I'm really curious if you could speak to how do we get from an institute whose intellectual godfather really focused on the need for equality in viewing American law and very much reveres Lincoln in the Great Emancipator model. How do we get from an institution based on his teachings to one of his students, Michael Anton, writing what becomes the Trumpian cri de coeur, the Flight 93 election, where he basically goes for a full-throated defense of defending a presidential candidate, Donald Trump, who really has nothing in common with Jaffa's views whatsoever.
Yeah. So
and that's probably like the subject of your whole book, so I apologize.
No, it's the subject of the first few chapters, because the Claremont group is like one little corner of it. And that's the way you just framed it is excellent and very helpful, because I do talk quite a bit about how they've turned their back on Jaffa in some respects, but also how there is a real continuity from Jaffa's mode of thinking to, like, I think it's kind of they've betrayed Jaffa while also being true to certain aspects of Jaffa's thought. And so, but Jaffa, you're right, he's sort of known for, I think I call it declarationism, and that, I mean, the creedal belief that America is kind of founded on an idea, the ideas in the Declaration. And in that second book, and I think you're right to think of it as kind of left wing, because the focus is certainly on human equality, right? Like that's the whole sort of core of what Jaffa's defending, and the human dignity and equality, against slavery.
But it's a very pasty white guy vision of
Jaffa's
equality.
isn't. Jaffa sort of and sort of not. Jaffa's isn't. I think Jaffa was not a bigot in that way. He was a bigot in other ways, but I think that it's right to focus on that. And the conservatives at the time, he clashed. He was a very feisty man. He clashed with other conservatives about this. They hated him. The paleo conservatives, or they were, before there were paleos, like Wilmore Kendall. There are these awesome debates with all these people who were more in the kind of, we would call it blood and soil conservatism, but they were it was more the agrarian Southerners and stuff like that. Who believed in a more sort of particularist, grounded, racist or what have you, but sort of community-based, communitarian kind of style of conservatism. Jaffa was their enemies because he was all about the universal principles. And so there are these fiery debates that happened between these, leading intellectuals of the time and Harry Jaffa. And they pinned him down exactly for that, for his belief in equality that they thought would lead to a kind of Caesarism and excess democracy. And so they called him out on that early on. And he held fast, right? He was so hardcore devoted to those principles in the Declaration. He called, and this is, I think, where it turns a little fanatical. I mean, I like the Declaration of Independence too. I like that whole style of originalism that appeals to principles rather than text. Like, there's a lot there that we could talk about. But he called the American founding the best possible regime, right? Like that it was basically like infallible political perfection to the extent that you could have it in that second book. And so I think that's insane, right? Who knows, right? It's an amazing thing that happened, that they were able to found this country, but it was also really messy, really ugly in a lot of ways. And Jaffa's whole world didn't have much space for that. And he also turns Lincoln into this kind of philosopher king, but Lincoln had to had to lead a war, right? And he had to make a ton of compromises, and he wasn't, I mean, there's nobody I admire more than Abraham Lincoln, partly because he was willing to do that, and I don't know how, right? A statesman can do that make those hard decisions. But Jaffa turns him into this basically a character in a Platonic dialogue. So it's very weird. There's a lot that's really weird about Jaffa's way of thinking, and he's so devoted to things like natural right and the kind of idea that this is all written in the stars and the American founding is perfection, that he ties himself also to an extremely narrow and moralizing outlook in more broadly. I talk about how he's a complete homophobe. I mean, a lot of people were much more homophobic back then, but it's aggressive, it's nasty, it's vocal against his own friends. I mean, it's really repulsive looking back on it. And and it's not just a quirk, he ties it to his natural law philosophy, right? And so there's a kind of fanaticism in Harry Jaffa that I think gets taken up by his heirs at the Claremont Institute, who have also, but I should say, and I'll stop, and they explicitly in some of the early writings about Trump turn their back on Jaffa and the declarationism that you mentioned and brought into this, and call themselves Paleo-Straussians. And so that's sort of they're basically saying Jaffa was much too hung up on the Declaration and the universal principle stuff. We want to note that there is something important about place and like what some of them are now calling like heritage Americans, and basically being white. And they're quoting white supremacists in this weird online secret journal they wrote before some of this stuff got public. And so they're sort of, and Michael Anton is explicitly saying we reject some of that universalism, and it's time to kind of narrow in and protect traditional America.
All right. So your phrase, or your use of the phrase Paleo-Straussian is a great bridge to our next beast in the bestiary, the Bronze Age pervert. Who is Bronze Age pervert?
Oh, come on, you're going right to the gutter, Ben. But I mean, do you want to?
Is he struggling with lust? I don't think he struggles.
I don't think he's struggling. I think he's high on life. And lust.
One follow-up question before we get to Bronze Age pervert, and I don't think the answer will be nearly as long to divert us from
contain
ultimately storming into that gutter. So how do you get from Leo Strauss is a German Jewish refugee who's writing about, ancient Greece and ancient Jerusalem and comparing the various philosophical trends that come out of that. He flees Nazi Germany. He comes to the United States as part of this wave
the New
of
School for Social Research, no less.
Yes, and ultimately University of Chicago, and he's part of this wave of religious minority refugees who are very much not of traditional American stock. How do you get from considering him to be an intellectual forefather of your thought to this sort of like blood and soil Americanism? Because there's I feel like they're missing a couple steps, or they're just not intellectually being honest. Probably the latter.
I mean, Leo Strauss focused almost exclusively on what we call Western Civ, right? And he was probably one of the best advocates for that tradition. I mean, I love that tradition now, thanks to Leo Strauss and his students. And it was completely counter to the cultural of sort of critical thought, activism that was also part of that story, right? Like Alan Bloom, right, wrote The Closing of the American Mind. There are critiques in Strauss that I think weren't very well versed in sort of contemporary America. Part of the criticism I raise in my book is that it's all very abstract, very unrooted from like on the ground events in the 60s and 70s, a lot of Strauss's thought. And very, I mean, from now it looks extremely conservative and kind of like clueless about, you know, the civil rights movement. But they weren't just clueless. They were actively opposed to a lot of the Straussians but Strauss, I think the deep thing here is that Strauss was deeply concerned about nihilism and for good reason, right? He thought, I think that part of what had happened in Europe was there had been a loss of grounding in sort of traditional moral understanding, and that had unleashed all kinds of crazy forces in the world, you know, from Marx to Nietzsche to Nazism. And so that he traced the cause of that to a loss of moral foundations and a loss of sort of just basic moral order. And so for him, I think it was probably a deliberate choice to, I mean, that's where you get into these complicated questions about philosophy and the history of like modernity. But he sort of said, we need to restore some of these ancient virtue ethics styles of thinking. We have to be really respectful of monotheistic religions. But it was all sort of couched in this one mode of thinking that was still kind of narrow in and didn't care at all about all the questions that a lot of Americans cared about in academia at the time. So there is this kind of way in which it supercharged the Western civ dynamic, and then Jaffa comes in and supercharges that with an American patriotic jingoism, traced back to the founding. And so you get that kind of bubbling up together, and I don't think it's that hard to see how it, over the course of generations of sort of shittier and shittier students, it turns into something really crass.
The jingoism overtakes. I mean, one thing that Strauss required was a lot of work. You know, and if you have the generations of shittier and shittier students is a key component of that, you know, one thing you have is each generation is doing a little bit less work than the previous generation. And at the end of that chain is J.D. Vance, right?
Yeah.
You know?
And you get a lot of insularity. I think that's one thing I try to kind of do in my book too, is just to show how there's no kind of self-correcting mechanisms, because while they're doing all this, they're attacking American universities. They're building the conservative world is sort of building up these alternative institutions. They're not engaging with normal scholarship so it becomes, I think, a bit of a problem there too, where there's no conversation between the different parts of academia that could correct some of their, they're always sort of on offense too.
Right. All right, Holly, and then we've only done one beast in this bestiary. And
oh, I might be jumping the gun then. I don't know.
No. So go, but then we're going to run long today. It's just going to happen.
I'm probably going to have to go at 9, but yeah.
But go for it.
Yeah, so is it Laura or Laura, by the way? Because my sister's Laura, and if you call her Laura, she will murder you.
Laura, yeah.
Okay, Laura. I will try, because my sister has
got it out of your mind.
Yeah. So my work, I come from a white evangelical background, and my book is on white evangelicalism. And so we all sort of obsessed with whatever our specialty is. So when I look at Trumpism, I really see, a clear line from not just recent, what's called Christian nationalism, but going way, way back into the white evangelical movement and some of the ideas there. But I don't know if it's really a sort of ideological influence that's in the movement, or are they just sort of a set of, because it's a very authoritarian culture, like you're basically raised to be an authoritarian, they're obsessed with order and hierarchy and you're obeying authority and patriarchy and all of those things. And of course, implicit in all that, which they don't want to talk about, is racial hierarchy as well, and certainly cultural hierarchy. So I don't know if it's that their ideas are actually sort of in this intellectual mix and belief system mix that is this movement, or if they are just a very convenient, large, as part of the electorate, they're a disproportionately large pool of authoritarian-minded voters that can be easily manipulated and exploited.
Yeah, so where all of that stuff is laced through the whole book, what is the beast that you see that authoritarianism and the sort of Christian nationalist ideology coming into the picture through, or the beasts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, I think that the people I'm talking about, I think it's sort of the latter in terms of your question, that the evangelical world isn't the same world. And the people I'm talking about, it's more like I'm talking about the people who sort of National Review people, right? The old sort of establishment, William F. Buckley crowd, the kind of the intellectual leaders of the Heritage Foundation, those are the people I'm talking about, is that kind of class of intellectuals. And that's where there are continuities. There are people who were fringe in that world, or who were constantly making these kinds of arguments. That's where there's been a tremendous shift, where it used to be led by kind of the Reagan fusionist types. And now many of those institutions, not all of them, have been taken over by the MAGA ideology. And you can I do in the book trace it out quite, just clearly and analytically. There's a big shift in the ideas people, where it gets, and I think that in some ways what you're describing, I say they're playing catch up with some of that cultural stuff, like the misogyny and a lot of the things that are sort of baked into some of these subcultures and the GOP base. The ideas people were formerly kind of keeping some of that stuff at bay, while also, playing with it. And now it's flipped, where these guys, the people who are now leading the ideological side of things, they're sort of an engine for a lot of those authoritarian ideas. So for the bestiary, there's authoritarianism. They're all kind of moving in that direction. The Christianity, I have my concluding chapter is about Christianity and Christian nationalism, because I knew I had to because it's so important to Trumpism overall. I tried to address how it all fits in there. And these guys, a lot of the Claremont style people will talk about the founding as a Christian founding. And so those are older arguments that are, of course, very prevalent. So they use a lot of those arguments. There's a Catholic dimension, and then some, like Yoram Hazony, who's the leader of the National Conservative Movement, has advocated for Christian nationalism, even though he's Israeli. But he basically thinks that a nation has to be pretty homogenous, right? It has to have one language, one religion, and he's willing to sacrifice his own, people in a way.
Stephen Miller's kind of in that camp too, I think.
In the willing to, well,
like
Stephen
he's
Miller,
Jewish.
is he Jewish? Right.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, exactly. So they're like, well, we'll take the hit. We'll take the hit, right? To preserve the American nation. And Stephen Wolfe is by far the most prominent person who's an outright Christian nationalist in my world. And so he has he's featured a bit in that final chapter, but he's a Calvinist. Right. So he's also kind of an outlier and is more in the Doug Wilson camp. So that kind of comes up too in that final chapter.
So let's do a kind of.
Do you want me to do the overview of the book and who's featured in which chapter?
Let's do the bestiary roundup.
Okay. Yeah, because we don't have much time, and then we can keep going. Okay, so the opening chapter is sort of my way into it is this Straussian world. So there's Jaffa and Leo Strauss and Alan Bloom. And then the second chapter is Michael Anton and some of these current early agitators for Trump. And so that's kind of an introduction to Anton is the featured person there. He's pretty weird. And Gladden Papin is the Catholic representative in that chapter who was part of this early ferment. And then Julius Krein, who I use as a kind of, he took the off ramp. He's somebody who...
He's a super interesting character.
Yeah, super interesting. And he disavowed Trump after Charlottesville. So then I talk about Patrick Deneen, very important, wrote Why Liberalism Failed, and he's sort of the introduction to the post-liberal group. Then there's Yoram Hazony, who's the NatCon leader, this Jewish Israeli American political theorist and activist, and the Chris DeMuth is in that chapter too, and I think Peter Thiel pops up there too for the NatCons. So there's a bit of
and Chris DeMuth, by the way, whom I know and who I used to think extremely highly of, who was the head of AEI for many years, and couldn't have been more mainstream, a conservative, and seeing him in this crowd is such a weird experience. I gotta say.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have felt that way and have said that. Anyone who I know who knows those circles is just shocked. But he's like, he has openly disavowed declarationism.
No, I have no doubt of his, but there are people in your book who it does not hit close to home, because I don't know anybody. I don't know Michael Anton. I don't know anybody like Michael Anton, right? I certainly don't know anybody like Bronze Age Pervert. But then there are people in that book, like I know Adrian
them.
Vermeule. I have sat on a beach with Adrian Vermeule, and and we have many close friends in common. I know Chris DeMuth. I have had dinner with Chris DeMuth relatively recently, at the home of a mutual friend. There is this quality of Invasion of the Body Snatchers or Rhinoceros, right, where people who and you think of as I don't know if quite bulwarks, but like these are not the people who are going to turn into rhinoceroses who are suddenly like sprouting horns, and it like the Chris DeMuth thing hurts, I gotta say.
And I think partly sorry.
So is DeMuth the one you did the podcast series with the first Trump administration?
No.
Whose argument basically came down to, this is my tribe and it's where I belong?
No, that was my former. So that is a former Brookings scholar who does not map onto any of the categories that Laura is describing. He's more of a foreign policy guy. And I don't think that's, I think he's an exogenous creature to any of this, frankly. Sorry, you were saying, Laura.
Oh, I mean, it doesn't matter. Do you want me to keep going on?
Keep going.
Okay. So the next chapter is like the real bestiary, where Bronze Age Pervert pops up. It's sort of this descent chapter into the hard right, which is Curtis Yarvin, Michael Anton it leads us in there, and Bannon, and Stephen Miller, and sort of some of the nastier characters, many of whom have Strauss PhDs where they wrote about Strauss, or like 4 or 5 of them, maybe 3 or 4. I don't want to exaggerate. So that's that. And then there's a January 6th chapter with John Eastman and the Claremont crew again. And then there's Hillsdale College and Patriotic Education chapter. There's a Chris Rufo chapter, which is more about the activism that's followed after January 7th and then in the years following the early years of the Biden administration. And then there's a Vermeule chapter, sort of follow up to the early Deneen chapter, which is again about post-liberalism, but about the constitutional dimensions of it. And Catholic integralism gets a hearing in that chapter. And there's a lot about Carl Schmitt in there too, because Vermeule's a big Schmitt guy. And then there's a second bestiary chapter, which is a follow-up on the BAP chapter, which is the end of Men. And there's a Tucker Carlson moment, and this guy, Raw Egg Nationalist, who you'll see, responding to JD's tweets on, and just this perverse person who's kind of a Dugan guy. And then there's the Christian nationalism chapter.
So help us bring all this together. Donald Trump has read not a word by any of these people.
Yeah.
And so when we say this is the intellectual constellation of movements, because it's really a bunch of interlocking intellectual puzzle pieces with each other. They're all in dialogue with each other. But they are not really in dialogue with Donald Trump, in the sense that he does not have a PhD in political theory. He's not a Straussian. He's not capable of the intellectual work that, I mean, one thing about these people is they're not stupid. And
Yeah.
some of them, like Adrian, are extraordinarily smart. I mean, I think he's the standout intellectual of the group, frankly,
Me too.
and remains among Harvard law students, there is a sort of like, okay, Adrian's crazy, but he's the best
brilliant.
administrative law professor, and
in history.
people, no, I mean, he's a genuinely important scholar in a way that's not wholly dissimilar from Carl Schmitt, frankly, right?
I agree completely. Yeah.
And these are not people who are meaningfully in dialogue with Donald Trump. So what does it mean when we say that this is the intellectual movement behind Trumpism? When the head is so clearly severed from the body?
Well, I think a number of things. I think, first of all, that has been an advantage to them because nobody can take it seriously. Nobody, I mean, there was an article the other day, or no, I was looking up this article about Anton in the Washington Post. And in the headline, it said, Trump intellectual is going to be leaving the administration. And all the comments were like, Trump isn't, Trump intellectual, that's an oxymoron. Like hundreds of comments.
Right.
And I get it. Michael Anton is not the best intellectual. He's not, he's not Adrian Vermeule, but that's insane, right? Like there are brilliant people working for Donald Trump now. And it's not just
Russell Vogt is an incredible, he's theorized stuff about what you could do to the executive branch, and he's figured out strategies for executing it. That is not a trivial accomplishment. If you're, I mean, it's an accomplishment in a wholly negative sense, but it is. This is not a frivolous individual.
No, and I think that's true of a lot of these people. And so I think that Trump's anti-intellectualism has sort of given cover in an extra way to this whole thing that's been sort of fomenting since 2016, and sort of has hidden that. And it's given them sort of more leeway, perhaps than would have been possible in other administrations to think up crazy things and to gain power quietly. So I think that's true. But I also think they saw something in Trump. Like if you read those early things by Anton and these other guys, Anton gives this very concise definition of Trumpism in 2016. He says it's economic nationalism, secure borders, and America First foreign policy. That's the essence of Trumpism. And, Trump would never have put it that way. He wouldn't have known, but that's absolutely right. And I think that's brilliant, right? I mean, it's also social conservatism and racism and all this other stuff bundled up in that. But, I think that's like the clearest definition I had ever seen. And so, and that tapped into the paleo stuff, right? That's going back to the early part of the 20th century in terms of what conservatism is, or what the sort of hard far-right conservatism, what it stands for. And so they saw something in Trump, and also, more importantly, possibly, they got J.D. Vance in there, right? J.D. Vance is their boy. And so he is reading all this stuff. He's been doing this, and he's across the spectrum. He's in on all different levels with all these different cohorts, all these different people. He's playing all the different sides. So that, I don't know if J.D. Vance will have legs in the future. I don't know how much he'll last, but he's playing this game, and that's all them.
Mike, Holly, do you guys have last questions before we wrap?
Yeah, what is the sort of tech nexus here? Because the tech bros like Peter Thiel, who I have to say he's got some weird religious ideology in there as well. So he's kind of a perfect horrible blend. But and I know they're all influenced by Curtis Yarvin, who's also a terrifying figure to me. But the tech bros seem to have this sort of extra, I don't know, futuristic, apocalyptic, post-human view of things. How does that? Do you talk about that at all? The sort of technology aspect?
Probably not as much as I should have. I mean, in hindsight, I probably would. I sort of didn't foresee the Curtis Yarvin uptick and the Elon Musk thing that allowed all that. I sort of think that that's a little like wacky, idiosyncratic. Like that's like a historical thing that happened. And I don't know if I just anyway. So, but I do talk about Yarvin. I find Yarvin's probably the one I dislike the most in the whole thing. I just can't read it. I find it absolutely insufferable. I mean, I'd rather read Bronze Age Pervert.
Cut in for a second here. One of the lovely things about Laura's book is how much, as a general matter, she loves these people, and she disapproves of. I keep
really
thinking.
Are you making fun of me?
No.
Okay.
So the great psychologist and writer who spent her time interviewing Nazi war criminals, Gita Sereni, once said, "God forgive me, but I love them so much." And she spent an entire career creating a bestiary of the worst people in the world. And Laura's book reminds me a little bit of this, just in the sense that not that these people are Nazis, though some of them are, but in the sense that the depth of engagement with their thought is extreme, and there is a quality of it's morbid fascination, it's love, it's something
That's
it's
true.
when you sort of when you get the sense that you've really figured something out and how someone's theory is put together. It does, I don't know, it gives you like an energy, I think, even if they're terrible and the ideas are terrible. I feel like, anyway, that's my experience. Maybe that's what you're talking about.
No, I mean, there's something a little twisted about it too. But I mean, I grant that. I mean, I'm a very sunny, happy person, like optimistic, like kind of, I think my friends would say I'm kind, like, you know, my kids, it's all nice. Like I got a pretty good, solid, wholesome life here. And I am attracted to this crazy stuff. I mean, I wrote my dissertation on Nietzsche and Rousseau, who are pretty weird. I know that that's part of, I mean, I'm just like totally, I've got a fascist streak in my soul, you know, just an authoritarian, you know, lust, I guess we'll say. I struggle with lust for that. Like I feel it, you know? So I am, but anyway, but Curtis Yarvin, no, I think he's an idiot and I can't stand reading him. And so I gave him short shrift in the book because I couldn't believe, and I hate the tech world. Like I'm a bit that way. I just can't believe that people take this shit seriously. And Thiel, I mean, Thiel is the same. I give him a bit more space, I think. And he's interesting. He's been obsessed with Leo Strauss for decades. And so he's got these close connections in the Straussian world and is in reading groups with the Claremont people are used to be. And so there's a kind of, that's fascinating to me. But, you know, he's got this famous, semi-famous for that world essay called The Straussian Moment, where he talks about Strauss and he talks about René Girard, who is much more in the news now because of the Antichrist stuff. But man, that essay is just shit. Like it's just this guy who I'm sure he's kind of brilliant in his own way, but it's just like a bad grad student paper in a way, you know, or something like that. It's in that genre. So the tech guys, I find it hard to take it seriously because I feel like it's almost so a symptom of our just like the lack of education that we have in this country, that these guys that so many people are caught up in that. And then, I mean, that's kind of a subtext of my book is higher ed and, you know, how there are these vulnerabilities because people are not well educated enough to see through some of this stuff.
All right, we got to wrap, but I have two important items of administrative business to do with you, Laura, before we wrap.
Mm-hmm.
The first is to make sure the audience knows. We call our audience the Greek chorus because it comments as we go on the side.
Lovely.
And Laura is going to be back As with a series, some of you will remember the Lawfare lecture series, which we had, Scott Shapiro and Sean O'Brien did that hacking course, and Paul Rosenzweig gave a Lawfare lecture, and Quinta Jurecic gave a Lawfare lecture. Laura is going to give a series of Lawfare lectures about the history that is contained in this book. They will be done live with audience questions for Lawfare material supporters, and then we will edit them into videos for release. So look for that to be scheduled in the next. We'll start scheduling them over the next few weeks after the book's release. That's administrative business number one. Administrative business number two, which was, I can't remember if it was raised by the estimable Holly Berkley Fletcher or the estimable Alicia Wanless, but, we have a book club on Dogshirt TV. It's called the Mara Book Club, Make America Read Again, in which we pair new authors of nonfiction with their chosen work of fiction, and that is thematically related somehow to their book. Um, and so a question, we are going to schedule you to come back, and by which time the Greek chorus will have read your book, because that's what they actually do. They go out and read the book, and then they will come back, and we will have a 90-minute session with you talking to the Greek chorus about the book, and them asking their questions, having actually read it, along with a piece of conceptually related fiction. Okay. So the question
what fiction would it be?
Yeah.
No, I've been trying to think about this, Ben, but I don't have an answer yet.
That's okay. You don't have to have an answer yet. We will.
You cannot pick Camp of the Saints.
I will not. I have to. I might choose something really light, but I can't do conceptual opposite of my book.
It's totally.
It illustrates something about your book. I feel like
it has to be.
Okay, I'll try to think. I'll think hard. If
there's an academic novel set at the Claremont Institute,
we should probably do Ravelstein.
Yeah, exactly.
Ravelstein is phenomenal.
So for those who don't know Ravelstein, it is a Saul Bellow novel about his dear friend Alan Bloom. Anyway, Laura, get back to me anytime with the and we will schedule this as the we're getting ready to schedule the next 3 months of Mara Book Club. So get back to us and we will include this.
Thank you.
We're going to be back tomorrow, and I got to tell you, we have another fabulous guest. The most improbable Janine Balekjian is joining us to answer your questions about the institutional role of the Office of Legal Counsel at Justice, and to discuss Taylor Swift's new album with Holly Berkley Fletcher.
I won't be there. I won't be here tomorrow because I will be in an MRI machine.
Well, I can't help you with that problem.
I don't think
Holly.
I can do the show from an MRI machine.
No, I don't think you can either, because the computer will.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it would kill me, in fact.
But you can text me the questions you want me to ask her about the new Taylor Swift album, and I will get her on the record about the subject. Janine, I just want to tell you guys in advance, she is not going to be discussing any particular opinion particularly, and she's not going to be, issuing denunciations of her former colleagues. She is going to be talking about the matter that we raised yesterday, which is what is the institutional role of OLC. And that is, what's that?
Sane washing the inexcusable.
No. I don't think she's going to be sane washing anything. I think
I'm just saying that's OLC's current role.
I will ask her about that particular question. Folks, we're 9 minutes over. I don't usually go over, as you know, but sometimes it happens. And when it happens, I do it without apology. We're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be fabulous. And you should join us.